Hello and welcome to the top 10 most likely unseen issues of the August 2018 strategic case study on newspaper group, the Finch News Group. So before we start, I'm just going to go through a bit of an introduction to this particular video and where I've got the information on and what you need to do with said information. So how have I come up with these top 10? Well, first of all, you look at the focus in the pre-scene. If there's a lot of material in the pre-scene on a certain topic, then it's likely that there is some kind of importance of that topic. It's likely to be brought up in the exams. There's more to talk about. And that feeds into the second point here, the degree of importance attached to it by the examiner. But that particular section extends beyond purely what's in the pre-scene, but also what CIMA like to examine. For example, ethics. It may be that there's no real mention of ethics in the case study, but ethics is considered very important by CIMA, and therefore they are likely to examine it. Next is the strategic importance. How important is it to the organization? If a certain topic is very important to the company, for example, say their suppliers. If they rely very heavily on a certain supplier, then it's likely that there might be an issue on the supplier. If something were to happen to that supplier, what impact could that have on the business? And also, just a more general experience in doing these videos in creating mock exams and reviewing exams in the past, the typical kind of issues that come up, and what kind of things have the examiner brought up in the past. And my final point here is about how easy it is to write issues on that subject. The people who write the exams are obviously people too, and they will go for ones that they know, that they can write good questions on. So what do you need to do for these issues? Well, first of all, it's important to prepare key models. So this will be things like your SWOT exam, like SWOT analysis, like your PESTLE analysis. Because building up this information now will help you to adapt the new information given you in the unseen, or help you to have that context to apply the unseen material. Next thing you need to do is practice exam questions on these issues. This will help you to understand the kind of questions that will be asked around these topics and how to answer them. And also, this next section here, it will help you to plan these answers in your mind so that when you go into the exam and you start writing, you'll already have a background in which to apply this new information. You'll already have certain points to bring up in your head as you're writing for them. And I've also put some more generic things here, such as the advantages and disadvantages of these certain topics, where they would be used and how models can be used to support them. So let's move on to the top 10 issues now. And so the first issue, issue number 10, is on ethics. The reason why I have chosen ethics to be one of my top 10 most likely issues is because it's one of the most commonly examined SCS topics. And at the strategic case study level, compared with, say, the management, particularly the operational level, there's far more marks associated, delegated to people and leadership. And this is the likely area in which ethics would fall in. It's also one of the big topics that CIMA really pushed at the syllabus change back in 2015, and they want to be seen as testing people on ethics. Because, of course, it's all part of being a good management accountant, an ethical management accountant, and so therefore it is tested regularly. In fact, it appears in most SCS variants, in most exams. Since the original strategic case study exam in March 2015, there have been ethics questions in some way, shape or form in 2 to 3 variants in every single strategic case study. So what that means is 40 to 60% of you watching this video now are likely to get some sort of ethical question in your exam. There's also been specific focus in the pre-scene as well, relating to staffing issues, spoke about the importance of staff, how staff are important, part of its corporate social responsibility. They're also critical to the way in which the business operates. They need good quality, well-trained and retained staff. Also, with the increase, particularly a very contemporary issue, the increase in fake news on Facebook, etc., more and more necessity for organizations, for news groups to justify their sources, to explain where their sources came from, and therefore it's part of a very strong ethical code in this organization to ensure that material is always trustworthy. Also, data security as well, highlighted as a risk in the risk register, and particularly with the move onto more digital media. There is more scope for material to be lost, material to be stolen, customers' details to be stolen, etc. And therefore, it's considered an ethical responsibility of the organization to ensure that that data is secure. Some more likely issues from the pre-scene as well, and also just things that have regularly come up in ethical questions in exams. Lots of information on material quality, goes back to the bit about fake news, which also ties in with ethics versus profitability. Do we risk perhaps reporting on things that are not incorrect, but we are perhaps fudging some of our journalistic integrity to try and sell more newspapers, to sell more subscriptions to our online accounts? If we were to put paywalls up, etc., we have to judge that. Are we going against our own mission statement? Are we going against our own strategy by doing that? Importance of treating staff well, again highlighted in the risk register and also prevalent throughout the pre-scene, especially where it spoke about how important it was to get its journalists involved in the organization, to be aware of everything the organization is doing, to have an input along with the rest of the community. And data, I've highlighted that as well, both in data usage, what we do with people's data, and also how well we secure people's data. And legal liabilities as well, because it was mentioned in the risk register, and particularly as we move on to digital, the chances of there being breaches, the chances of things that perhaps have not been thoroughly fact-checked or perhaps are not correct going online, which in turn will also risk our reputation. Remember from the mission statement in the precinct spoke about how we need to be a trusted news source, we need to provide material that is valuable, that our readers can value. And if we were to go against that, we risk losing them. They won't keep purchasing our newspapers, they won't keep signing on to our online news sites if we are not providing them with that reputable, trustworthy news. And other issues that have risen in many of the previous case study exams are things such as bribery to win a contract, perhaps. Always say that bribery is unethical. Never try to justify bribery. Nothing will annoy the examiner, the marker, when marking your script than seeing you try to justify this. So with ethics, almost think about it in a case of, or in a sense of there being no gray area. If it's black or white, that is ethical or unethical. You cannot try and justify anything as being ethical if there's a hint of it being unethical, because CIMA will not like that. So treatment of suppliers as well, less likely in this instance because we are not a huge organization. Sometimes in previous case studies you've had huge multinational organizations who have been mistreating and abusing their buyer power over their small suppliers, which of course is unethical, and so it's less of an issue in this instance, but we may be given information to the contrary of that in the unseen exam. Issues over wastage, pollution, recycling, etc. We already know that the company endeavors to be as environmentally friendly as possible. It only uses sources or suppliers who source their materials from recyclable backgrounds. Issues over governance as well, not running the organization properly to the care of all stakeholders. Also confidentiality, so not allowing information to fall into the wrong hands, not allowing information to be misused. So some key points that I've already brought up, how CIMA want you to be highly ethical. You must always take the moral high ground, act from an ethical perspective. So Again, don't try and find the grey area when it comes to ethics. It's right or it's wrong, and always go on the side of right, on the side of if there's any chance that it might be a bit unethical, go with it being unethical. It's a good phrase to use here. Good ethics is the right thing to do, even if it doesn't always make commercial sense. Of course, there are limits to that, as in we can't pass up on something that could save the company just because it's tiny bit unethical, or there's like certain factors of it might be a tiny bit unethical, but generally always go for something that is ethical. And when you're answering a question on ethics, always try to make a recommendation. Obviously, if they have specifically asked one, it needs to be a substantial one. If there isn't any actual question that is asking for a recommendation, they're not really asking you to give a summary or anything, still give one, because not only does it show business acumen, it also ties up the question nicely, makes your points more valid, and also demonstrates that you're integrating lots of the theories together. You're integrating what it means for the company going forward. In a sense, you are thinking the big picture. You're thinking strategically, which of course is the aim of the strategic case study exam. And when making a recommendation, look to put in a recommendation of the short and the long term, essentially dealing with a specific issue in the here and now, and considering how to avoid such situations from arising again in the future. So again, we're thinking big picture, we're thinking strategically. We're not just thinking about what we need to do today to stop this particular issue that has come up. We're thinking about how we can save money, save time, save problems in the long run by putting procedures in place to stop this kind of issue from ever happening again. So obviously the key theories to use, we have the American Accounting Resolution Model. Now, you don't need to use this in the exam. It's not one of the models that is used in the CIMA syllabus, but what it is good for is that its particular components act as a good checklist for analyzing ethical responsibility. So who do we owe a duty of care to? What could happen if we don't do this? What do we at this organization value? And also, what is the greater environment? What are the cultural norms within Borland? What are the rules and regulations within Borland? And obviously as well, we need to include these CIMA ethical principles. This is CIMA's big model. One thing I would say when it comes to these 5 principles, though, is if there is perhaps an issue with objectivity, perhaps someone is hiring someone that they are related to, even though there are better people for the position, perhaps someone is mistreating data, and that's a confidentiality breach, mention this, as in mention confidentiality or mention objectivity as part of the CIMA ethical principles, maybe even mention the 5 CIMA ethical principles, but don't then talk about the ethical principles. Only talk about confidentiality or objectivity, whichever one is relevant. Don't tell me everything you know about integrity. Don't then tell me everything you know about confidentiality. Don't tell me everything you know about professional behavior, objectivity, professional competence and due care and so on, because that is not the question you are being asked. It's not a test of your theory regurgitation, it's a test of your ability to answer the question. So just a quick note on that while we are here is to always talk about the bits of a theory, the bits of a model that are relevant, not everything you know about that model. Issue number 9 is to do with staff. This could be through their union membership or potential striking, etc. The reason why I've chosen this is a very common issue. Again, a lot of these issues are ones that have regularly come up. You can look at the different exams, the previous past papers on the CIMA website, and generally they do recycle a lot of the same sorts of questions. So given that this has come up a lot in the past, particularly where there have been unions, where there have been specific mention of unions within the pre-scene. And of course there was the article about the Borland Journalist Union, and also it indicated they were willing to act on things. When there were jobs being lost at TJ Publishing, they mentioned about how their job now was to monitor it, step in if necessary, and ensure that all the journalists at TJ Publishing got a fair deal. And generally, It will fall into both people and leadership marks, because people skills, people marks are all about analyzing and treating stakeholders fairly, and leadership is all about recommendations, etc., and dealing with crisis such as a strike. So it's really a good way of getting in people and leadership marks. And so key issues that could come up: perhaps the union wants a pay rise, given that times are tougher for journalists. A lot of journalists are getting laid off and they want to be more recognized for the work that they do. Could be a redundancy program because new technology has been brought in. We're pushing more things online. Perhaps there is a efficiency program, cost cutting. We know that FNG are constantly trying to cut costs because of the falling demand. And that will, of course, cause a lot of problems because they need to cut costs because the business is starting to become unprofitable. Its profit margin was only 0.38%, its net profit margin this year. So we won't be able to afford these pay rises. We might have to make more cost-cutting measures, and that could lead to redundancies. And we've seen it from larger companies such as TJ Publishing, larger companies than FNG that have had to do it. And so it may be no option but to cut costs by letting some people go, which of course is going to cause problems with the union. And of course we cannot necessarily cave in because we have to make these measures. If we don't make these measures, the company might go bust because we do need to cut costs. And these could lead to strike actions. And there is precedence for strike action in this kind of area, not just manufacturing organizations. Remember the Hollywood writers' strike, it's a very similar position, as in it was large companies that had lots of people producing content for them, writing content for them, and they went on strike. And it had an enormous impact on films and television shows produced in Hollywood during that time. And so, of course, there are reasons that we would want to avoid a strike, why we might want to give in because of lost revenues. We wouldn't have anyone writing stories, writing articles, could cause bad motivation. After the strike ends, everyone's still moody and it increases the chance of more striking. Also could be bad publicity as well, when everyone gets a hold of the stories, when our competitors get a hold of those stories and start saying, oh, well, this newspaper, they treat their employees really bad. And so it could have a real impact on the brand. And we know that we are a socially responsible company. In fact, the company even said how much they value trade union membership and they recognize the trade unions, etc. So we don't want to damage our relationship with those either. But of course, we can't always give in easily because we have a duty of care to our shareholders. For example, the Finch family only 60% of the profits. However, the journalists may not appreciate the fact that they withdrew more in dividends than the company actually made in profit last year. So they're not going to care too much about the wealthy Finch family, who they may almost think are using the company as their own personal bank account. Of course, change is also necessary to continue to grow the business in a competitive market. We know that we are losing a lot of money at the moment, or our profits are really starting to get towards that big fat zero mark. And so we do need to make changes to ensure that the company continues to thrive. Because ultimately, if it goes into liquidation, everyone's going to lose their job. They're going to lose their job anyway, as are all the other people whose jobs aren't at risk. And in the exam, always try to negotiate, to compare both sides of the story and come up with a conclusion. Don't go in with just get rid of them if they want to strike. Don't try and be very strict like that. Always try to consider both sides because, of course, it's ethical to do that. We need to think of all stakeholders, all shareholders, etc. And so key theories to use, obviously, have change management models, ensuring that the change is successful, thus not leading to issues where we could strike, and keep the union close as a key player. Make sure they are involved in decision making, make sure they are aware of things when we're looking at our Mendelow's matrix, etc. And also remember that anyone who is a significant shareholder will, of course, want to increase their profits and also will want the company to do well. So thank you for watching this video. I hope you have enjoyed it and, more importantly, you have found it useful. I'd like to finish by just telling you a few things about the products that we produce here at Astranti and the ones that are part of our course. So these materials can all be purchased as part of the course or purchased individually. So we have our study text. We have 3 study texts for all the objective test exams. So 3 study texts for E1, P1, F2, F3, etc. But we also have the study text specifically for the case study exams, split into 2 parts. The first is about how to approach the exam, how to analyze the information, how to plan your answers, how to write your answers, and also the second part, which looks at the key theories from the objective test levels that are relevant to the particular case study. So if you are looking at P2, F2, E2 for the management exam, F3, P3, E3 for the strategic case study exam, and so on. We have our course videos, which look at how to plan your answers, how to manage your time effectively. These are the key reasons why people fail the exam. We have our pre-scene analysis, which looks at the pre-scene in a lot of depth, applies key information to that, and also concludes with the strategic analysis, where we look at the various different models in the CIMA syllabus and apply them to the case, and also the top 10 most likely issues to arise in your exam. Generally, we have a 70 to 80% accuracy rate on our top 10 issues. Our industry pack, which details in great depth the history and the current contemporary issues within the particular industry that the pre-scene is based on. We also have 20 to 25 industry examples that you can use within your answers. We have mock exams that can be purchased with or without marking and feedback, where you can get some real exam practice in, look for the kinds of things that the examiner is going to bring up in the exam, and also get marking and feedback from expert markers who have marked for CIMA and for us for many years, who know exactly the kinds of things that the examiner is looking for, exactly the kinds of mistakes that students often make, and can provide lots of detailed feedback to ensure that you improve on your performance. We also have our master classes, which are 2 day-long classes which look at all the key issues facing students in the exam. We will also go through live planning, showing you how to plan your answers effectively, how to write your answers effectively. Again, key things that cause people to fail the strategic case study exam, or any of the case study exams for that matter. And also, if you do sign up for our course, provided that you have filled out your forms, provided that you have submitted your mocks, provided you have done everything to show that you have really given it your all to try and pass this exam, we also offer a pass guarantee, giving a free resit to anyone who fails the exam.